Good morning. My name is Tommy Johnson. I'm with the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Growth Basics for Business, monthly breakfast seminar series, which provides a forum to gain useful do-it-yourself workplace solutions and insightful, actionable tips. I want to thank Eaton Peabody Partners for their continued support of this virtual event for the entire season. I'd like to welcome you all to this third installment of Growth Basics for the calendar 2023-24. This 10-part season-long series runs from September through June. Now, today's topic, diversity, equity, inclusion with a goal of belonging, is presented by Julia Trujillo Luengo from the State of Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. As more and more organizations work to be more inclusive and responsive to racial and cultural diversity, the importance of this topic could not be any more timely. Now, like all Chamber virtual signature events, today's presentation is free and will be recorded and made available for free replay on the Chamber's website and YouTube page. To keep up to date on all Chamber news and events, please visit our website, portlandregion.com, and check out our events page and sign up for our weekly email newsletter while you're there. Before we get into today's presentation, I also wanted to share with you that we're continuing to use StreamYard as our virtual platform for all of our virtual Chamber events. This platform provides many improved production and interaction elements, which I think you'll be happy to see. I'd also like to remind you that if you have questions for our presenter, please type them in the YouTube chat, and they'll be relayed to our presenter at the end of the presentation, which will save a little bit of time to get to all of your questions. Now, at this point, I usually acknowledge our presenting sponsor of Growth Basics for Business, Eaton Peabody, and would typically invite Marketing Manager Nate Levesque to say a few words. Unfortunately, Nate cannot be with us today as he and his wife just welcomed their first child. Everyone's doing fine, so we wish them great luck and success. For the past 6 years, Eaton Peabody has been the presenting sponsor of this series, and they continue their support this season. They are a full-service, Maine-based law firm with nearly 50 attorneys serving Maine clients from Augusta, Bangor, Ellsworth, Portland offices. They assist companies of all sizes in a variety of industries, so whether you're an established financial institution or a small business taking the first steps, they can help with all of your legal needs. To learn more about the services that they provide and the industries that they serve, please visit their website, eatonpeabody.com, and also be sure to follow them on Facebook or LinkedIn to stay up to date on legal updates and future presentations. Now, I'd like to introduce our presenter. With us today is Julia Trujillo Luengo, who is a Plan Implementation Director with the State of Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. Julia has well over a decade of experience working in migrant education programs, multicultural affairs, and economic opportunity. She worked at the State of Maine for 7 years before coming to the municipal level, which is where I had the chance to meet her, while working for the City of Portland for over 5 years. She proved herself to be so valuable that Governor Mills seized her and brought her back to the state, where she has worked in her current role for the past 2 years. Julia originally hails from the Canary Islands, which is part of Spain, and we're very lucky that she now calls Maine home. So with that said, take it away, Julia.
Thank you, Tommy. Let me see if I can you see the slides? Yes. Let me just make it a little bit bigger for me. So thank you so much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning here in Maine. I know that some of us have gotten our few flakes of snow. It is a pleasure to be with you. As Tommy said, my name is Julia Trujillo Luengo. I work for the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. As many of you have heard me in several presentations, I wear a big sombrero for the department. My primary role at the department is to implement the 10-year strategy, but I do a lot of other things because of my experience, both professional and personal. What I'm going to be speaking about with you this morning is mostly about belonging and the framework of belonging. I have a lot of content to go through, but as Tommy said, I'm happy to answer questions at the end of the presentation, and feel free to put them in the comments. So first, I thought it was important to contextualize the discussion with some data. I know it's early in the morning. Be kind and not inundate you completely. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, of course, there's a lot of categories, a lot of different identities. And just for this morning's purposes, I am going to be framing our conversation around Title VI. And the categories that are protected within Title VI, which are race, color, or national origin. race, you'll see the different racial categories. This, the ethnicity flag, it's also associated with our race and color protections, and also the national origin. We'll be speaking about mostly our foreign-born population or our immigrant population, as well as, I won't touch upon this so much, and when we speak about primary language and our obligations to translate and interpret, comes from the national origin clause in Title VI. So in terms of population, I think a lot of us have been in this space, have been thinking about and hearing about our demographic winter that we have in sort of the population perspective. But there has been some changes that have occurred since 2020, since post-pandemic, that are pretty positive from a population perspective. So just to give you a sense, in the last decennial from 2010 to 2020, our population here in Maine increased by 2.6%, which put us at 42nd in the nation overall. But when you look at 2020 to 2022, in just 2 years, we jumped to 14th in the nation overall, with a total population increase of 1.7%. The primary drivers of that change are our immigration numbers, particularly, as you can see here in the graph, our domestic immigration. In 2021, we were 7th in the nation overall for domestic migration. And in 2022, we were 11th in the US as a whole. When it comes to those folks who are coming into our state, both from an international and a domestic migration perspective, you can see that we have a very young cohort, which is, wearing my other sombrero, my other hat, from a talent attraction perspective and a retention perspective, is really positive news. As you can see here, less than 16, our primary working age 25 to 54, a very high share of the population overall. When it comes to our racial makeup, considering these are 2020 numbers, you can see that we're still very much a white state, but that there are categories that are shifting, and I'll speak to this in the next few slides. Particularly the two or more races, it is a trend nationwide. It could be because of changes in population, but also because, as you can see from these categories, they're not entirely perfect, so you may not fit into one category. So instead, you select two or more races. This is kind of sort of hard to see, but I'm happy to share the presentation. I'm not sure if it will be on YouTube later on, but this gives you a sense of our racial categories and ethnicity flag across all counties in our state. Again, these are 2020 numbers. Things have shifted. But it gives you a sense that not only the Androscoggins and the Cumberland counties have that diversity, but that you can find that diversity across every county. If you look at, for example, the Hispanic or Latino of any race, which is the sort of sky blue category, you can see how they are present across every county, even in counties that we may not think would have such a high presence, as in Aroostook County or in Washington County. I often, recommend folks that if you really want to better understand who is in your county, in your own town, in your own community, that school level data is really very accurate and very helpful to understand those dynamics. This is an overlay of the different racial categories and ethnicity categories against the foreign-born flag. So that helps us understand kind of the nuances across communities. So we can see, for example, in the first column, that most of our foreign-born population is white alone. But when it comes to our Black or African-American community, we can see how there's a 50-50 divide. So 50% of our Black or African-American population here in Maine were born in the U.S. and almost half were born outside of the United States. That could be because those coming from domestic migration are part of these racial categories, or it can be because of our second or third generation of immigrants. As some of you that are familiar with these communities, for example, our Somali community first came in the year 2000s, and now we're seeing second and third generation. So that can be attributed to that. When it comes to our American Indian, Alaska Native, or our First Nation tribes, You can see, of course, a greater share of those born in the US. Asian alone, a higher share of the foreign-born Asian alone category. What I usually highlight in this category is that when we speak of Asian, it encumbers a really wide geographical spectrum, anywhere from the Middle East, so Syria, to Thailand. So it is right now, the federal government is looking at these categories to see how they could be a little bit more granular to better be able to ascertain these unique aspects of each group. Some of other races are alone, or two or more races, same dynamic. And when it comes to the Hispanic population, you can see how the majority of the Hispanic or Latino population in our state are indeed US born and not foreign born, which also is helpful to note. When it comes to the age of these racial categories, you can see that across the spectrum, whether we're talking about under 18 or 18 to 64, there's a higher share of younger age brackets and a lower share of the 65 and above. So we're talking about a very young population overall here. Probably is easier to understand in this pyramid, much wider margin under 5 years, and the pyramid gets it shortens as we reach the 65 to 84 years old. When it comes to labor force participation, I usually like to highlight this slide because I think all of us probably in this call understand that we have a very tight labor market. Our labor force participation overall usually stays around the 60% mark. But when we actually look at our prime working age, which is considered 25 to 54-year-olds, you can see how we're on par with the nation, and we actually have an 80% plus labor force participation rate. So this is important to understand who is currently available in our labor force in order to meet our market demands. When it comes to unemployment rates, and I'm sorry, I'm going really fast. I'm just going through this data quickly to then get into the implementation of the work. You see the unemployment rate on par across most racial categories, except our American Indian and Alaska Native population, which share a higher share of unemployed populations. When it comes to unemployment rate among the main foreign-born against the U.S.-born population, you can see how we have a lower share of the unemployed within the foreign-born population than the U.S.-born population. This is also important because I often hear, we would like to tap into the immigrant community, and this shows that the immigrant community, for the most part, are not unemployed, are working, mostly probably, if not one job, two jobs, sometimes even three jobs. So if you're trying to do a sort of a value proposition to this community, just know that most likely they're working somewhere else. When it comes to the educational attainment of main population, the foreign-born versus the U.S.-born, you can find a margin difference in the sort of the two ends of the spectrum. In less than high school graduate or graduate or professional degrees, you can see a higher share of the foreign-born in less than a high school graduate. So, some folks are maybe have a third grade education, sometimes not literate in their own language, but then you also find them in the same degree and on par when it comes to a bachelor's degree or graduate professional degree or above, a much higher share. This is what we call brain waste, and it's probably something that you've experienced in your workplaces. That's why I often say, in the immigrant community, we don't have so much of an unemployment issue, but we have an underemployment challenge that we're trying to solve for at the state level. And I think a lot of employers are doing great work. So what do we do about all this information? I often recognize that employers and organizations are really overwhelmed. And I call it sort of salad bowl that you don't really know how to sort and what salad dressing to put on, et cetera. And a lot of the expectation is, we just want to know exactly what we need to do and how we need to do it in order to engage in this work. And we don't have magic potion that we can offer to folks. This type of work is a journey. It's not really a destination. It is something that you have to stick through it, and at the end, kind of go with the small wins. Shall we dance? I usually invite this because when those of us who have been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion for a long time, and probably our HR professionals, have seen these sort of messages. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. But I argue that this dynamic or this framework has not always yielded results, because when you are asked to be invited to the party, I don't believe that probably everyone who needs to be at that party has been part of that party. So in other words, those folks that are most familiar, like myself, diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals, those who have done the work before have been part of those tables. But I don't believe everyone that has a genuine interest in learning how to be supportive of these efforts have always been invited to this table, have always felt comfortable being invited to these tables. Perhaps if someone doesn't know how, or they have questions, maybe have not engaged in the same way. So it's really been sort of a very exclusive group of folks. And therefore the work maybe has existed more so in a vacuum than really spread across the organization. And then for those of us who are racial or ethnically diverse, we've had to rely on this small group of folks inviting us to this party or being asked to dance, rather than relying on the organization as a whole. To really have the conditions set that we don't need to be waiting to be asked to join and join these efforts. The same occurs for the welcoming work. Welcoming work is usually positive and necessary, but it generally involves a small group of folks inviting another group to join and to integrate or to adapt, or what's another verb that it'll come to me, into this wider whole. So we're sort of the receiving community asking another set to integrate into this space, and that has not yielded the results because we're not talking about a community as a whole. Instead, I think the belonging framework, which takes inclusion, equity, and diversity into its context, is a much more effective framework overall. In this context, belonging, it is not about certain individuals integrated into a wider whole, but the way we come together as a whole group or community to create the conditions and set the stage that belongs to all of us. It also encourages, which I think is a very important element, the ratio between highlighting what makes each of us unique, but also encourages us to recognize what binds us together. And I use some examples here. So in this context, I borrow a lot of things from LinkedIn, which are really a front runner in this space. Diversity is the quality of or state of having many different form types, ideas, which already probably you share in your workforce. Inclusion is the action or state of including or of being included within a group or structure. And belonging is where I can be myself. I can be authentic, I matter, and I'm essential to my team. I don't have to conform, I don't have to fit in, unless the values of that organization, but I can integrate myself into that space without really compromising. So in this framework, diversity and inclusion are, again, important, but they can't exist without the belonging, which is the ultimate outcome. So how do we operationalize belonging? There's a lot of frameworks out there, a lot of steps that you can take. I've just put these 4 together to get us started. The number 1 is to get proximate, to embrace vulnerability and lean into the nuances of things, foster meaningful and authentic connection, of course, address bias, and equally important, remain accountable throughout the process. So when I speak about get proximate, embrace vulnerability, and learn into the nuance, you may laugh when you see this photo, but as we become more and more diverse as a state, I ask organizations, do your homework. The data is there. Talk to folks. I use my example as a name. You heard Tommy introducing myself. My name is Julia Trujillo Luengo. I have 2 last names. Like most folks in the Hispanic or Latino world, we all have 2 last names, Trujillo for my father, Luengo for my mother. But a lot of us just go with our first name. And you usually hear me introduce myself by Julia Trujillo. So if you know that there are folks, like I showed you in certain counties, Washington County or Aroostook County, there's a high share of populations of Hispanic or Latino descent, get to know that community, ask questions, ask candidates, learn more, learn how to pronounce these last names and practice. I mean, I think I can't tell you how many times I felt excluded from a room, from a conversation, from a meeting, because everyone else is introduced by their first and second and last name, but I'm only introduced by my first name. So these are important moments of connection and belonging that you don't want to miss. I use the name underneath, Justin Nizeyumukiza. I don't know if Justin is in the room, but he was a staff of mine, originally from Rwanda. And I practiced and practiced and practiced. For those of you who know people from that part of the world, in East Africa, a lot of countries like Rwanda and others, they actually, the last name that they give someone is something that is customized, created by the parents, like the jewel that oversees the son. So their really unique identity is more so the last name. So when I hired Justin, I practiced and practiced and practiced his last name so I could share it as I introduced him in meetings. Sadly, 2 years later, something like that, Justin moved on, and his last name, he changed his last name to Nizeye. Then he changed it to something else, and I think now it's Justin Jensen, probably because it was challenging to pronounce. But these are moments that we can really be inclusive and really feel like folks belong. In the introduction, Tommy said I'm from the Canary Islands. So without getting into the nuance of the Canary Islands, automatically people think, oh my God, the Canaries, full of canaries, I'm sure. But no, in reality, the Canary Islands are named the Canary Islands because the CAN in Latin means dog. So in the early 1100s, the islands were inhabited by dogs. So they were called by sailors and folks and individuals like that, the islands of the dogs. And that's why they're called the Canary Islands. Why I tell you that is because when you think of something in a first impression, try not to stay there and just dig a little bit deeper. I use usually my own example. So it's me, myself in the middle. I am from the Canary Islands of the coast of Morocco. You see the Canaries on the left hand of your screen. Below, you see a typical image of the Canary Islands, palm trees native to the islands, high mountains, volcanoes, etc. It's 70 degrees year round. But when off to the right, you see myself with my mom. My mom is from an area in mainland Spain off Madrid. And I share a lot of customs from my mother's region. You can see a tiny little picture of where my mom was born underneath there. And so I eat food like she does. Our customs and traditions at home are not based in the Canary Islands, even though that's where I was born. But I was born in a very different part of Spain. But when you think of Spain, you think of flamenco dancers and music like that. I don't dance flamenco. I sort of enjoy the music, but in the Canary Islands, you see the picture right under me. We have a lot, probably stronger or just as strong ties with Latin America and the Caribbean than we do with the rest of Spain. So we usually dance more like merengue and salsa, and our accent is much more similar to Puerto Rico than it is from the rest of Spain. But of course, I've lived in Maine for almost 24 years, and you can see I love to run in the snow. It's something that my parents think, and my family back home, that is nuts. But I'm also an artist. I love to oil paint. And then you see the picture at the bottom, which shows a statue with a sort of a hollow torso. That is an important statue that speaks of the immigrant experience. So to me, it resonates with me because I feel like it is something that is always missing from me is my sense of belonging back home. But I also realize that I'll never probably belong 100% here in Maine or back home because of the dynamics of what being a migrant means. So I tell you all this because intersectionality is very important in not putting folks into very specific categories that feel claustrophobic, but instead get to know the many layers of what we all have to offer and who we are. If you haven't seen The Danger of a Single Story as a TED Talk, I highly encourage you to do that. Our author says the single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but that they're incomplete. They make one story become the only story. These are other examples of single stories. When we speak of Africa, we speak mostly, we refer to the diversity within Africa in a single story. And of course, it's not the same coming from South Africa, then coming from Morocco, then coming from Rwanda, then coming from Senegal. So just trying to get in the nuance of things is extremely important. I use the title at the top. I can't tell you how many times, because folks think I'm Hispanic and Latino. They have wished me a happy Cinco de Mayo. I'm not Mexican. And then the pictures that you see are, the bottom picture is the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is where a lot of our most recent migrants are coming from, internationally speaking. And then the three pictures above are the capital of Angola, which is the other country of origin that a lot of and then when you think of Africa, you don't usually see these images. So I try to be a little disruptive and try to get us think a little bit differently. The second step is foster meaningful and authentic connection. So usually when we invite folks in an organization that we're trying to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, we do it with the best intention, but at the end of the day, we other more than we include. We usually do it, for example, with multicultural potlucks. That's very common. And sometimes we don't realize that even with food, maybe somebody just doesn't really know how to cook, or somebody doesn't want to be reminded of the smell or the odor of something cooked from back home because it triggers some trauma. So instead, think about your organization as a whole and the opportunities of engagement for employees as a whole, and try to better ascertain if those spaces are indeed inclusive. And if not, what are spaces of your entire workforce that could invite and could engage your entire workforce. So usually, for example, if you still want to do like a potluck, we did this when I was at the city of Portland. We thought of an element like the dumpling, and we created a whole event around it, essentially saying, the dumpling is this concept of some dough that is filled with vegetables or some kind of meat, is steamed or fried. And this concept exists in many other different cultures and countries of origin. We have the tortellini in Italy. We have the empanadas in the Latin world. We have the sambusas in India and Somalia. So the concept that we can have something that unites us all, that binds us, but also the unique interpretation of this very simple concept. We also held at the city of Portland belonging tables. So we just invited employees and asked questions of belonging. What does belonging mean to you? How do you belong in this space? And how do you not belong in this space? So on both ends of the spectrum, it's not supposed to be only a sort of a toxic positivity moment. but it's really to engage in a conversation that is authentic, and it gives us some very actionable steps of what our shortfalls are and what it is that is working. That's why I put the other two images. It's not supposed to be only just a very sort of easy and comfortable space. For the most part, it's a vulnerable space. It carries a lot of discomfort. And we also offered, we had a program called the Natural Helpers Program, and there were different representatives of different immigrant communities, and we talked about challenging topics as well that needed a table. For example, anti-Blackness within the immigrant community. That's something that back in 2020 we needed to discuss, and we offer that table. So it can give you that space to also touch base on challenging discussion topics. Here, these are come from LinkedIn, our belonging moments. Again, I shared data earlier today. For example, if you're thinking about understanding who your population is within your county, I remember an organization decided to translate a lot of their materials, or I'm driving through Wyndham and seeing a lot of things translated in a specific language, or this organization statewide, I'm sorry, translate a lot of things in German. It's like we don't have a big German population. So when you translate something to a different language, you're automatically telling me that I'm not being seen in what you're doing. So I think it's very important to meet and get proximate with the communities that live here and better understand how is it that I can speak to you. For example, the talent attraction, another thought. I share that there's a higher share of graduate professionals and above. Be bold and very clear that international degrees are welcome and accepted. By just stating that myself with a master's degree from abroad, I don't have to self-doubt if you're going to accept it or not, but you're directly speaking to me and my own unique experience. These are other belonging moments that are shared through LinkedIn and other employers that I think are very important. The third step, address bias. For me, I think a lot of organizations and employers have been doing this for a long time, but I think it is critical that this is done in decision-making moments. That is when really the bias training, the bias elements need to come into play. And also that they happen across the organization, that this is not an only HR only effort, but that is hiring managers need to be included in these kinds of opportunities to better understand their own unconscious and conscious bias. And then, of course, remain accountable. That is a very, very critical piece of this work. There's a lot of ways that we can measure things that are a little bit sort of ambiguous as belonging and inclusion. And there's a lot of work out there that I'm happy to share. But I think ultimately you can sort of create your own rubric, which is what we were trying to do when I was working at the city. And really incorporate some of these elements to your annual employee satisfaction surveys or engagement surveys to better understand how people indeed feel like they belong at work. These are just some suggestions that could work, and then remain and then share these publicly and hold yourself accountable against that. I've seen a lot of large national companies who were strong at the beginning, but they did not continue to measure themselves against these, and recognizing that these will likely shift over time because a lot of this work is based on continuous quality improvement, but that at least you are trying to move the needle and really trying to address belonging across the organization. So lastly, just a reminder, lean into the discomfort. I've noted over the years in Maine that what we do is like we get really excited about DEI. We really want to engage. We feel like it's a little bit difficult, that we can't really there's questions, there's discomfort, and then when those begin to pile up, we just give up and say we can't do it and we retract. That is what can't happen. This work is full of discomfort, and we need to move through the continuum and stay there. So in this space, in the belonging space, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance, but belonging is dancing like no one's watching. So show up, remain there, because this work belongs to all of us. And I am done, and I can take questions if helpful, and if not, I can show a quick little video once we've ascertained the level of comments.
Julia, thank you for that informative presentation. I'm waiting for some questions to show up in the chat. I think we may have our first one here that I'm going to read off to you. Is there a universal tactic that we can all employ to create a sense of belonging for new Mainers?
I think the tactic is always to go back to the we, to try to avoid othering by putting yourself in one space that you're trying to integrate into this wider whole. And like I said in the definition, and I think the other piece is not highlight so much what makes us different, because when all we see is difference, it's hard for us to connect, and to try to also integrate in there what binds us together, what are common threads. So if you're trying to engage your employees or your workforce, just having a conversation, or what does it feel to you to be home, or what does a dinner table usually look like at your house? Just things that people can relate to each other, rather than whole separate different gatherings for specific folks that not everyone is part of. So I think affinity groups are fine, of course, but I think we often forget the all that we share element of this work, and that is why we're not moving the needle.
Thank you. And I think there might have been a second part of that question, which was more to a specific example. Do you have an example maybe of an approach that's proven to be successful with a specific cultural group? Maybe it be folks from Spain, or maybe some of our sub-Saharan Africans. Is there an example, the best practice that you've noticed that you've seen to be successful?
I think it's about what matters to the employees that you have, and specific to, like I said, I think putting ourselves in too many boxes is not entirely helpful. I think getting to know that human being is what matters. And I know we're talking about feelings and things like that are not usually very organizational or corporate, but that is I can't give you this is what you do for Rwandans, and this is what you do for Senegalese, and this is what you do for Iraqis. I can tell you, with working with a lot of different communities from many parts of the world, is that the number one is for you to be authentic in that engagement and ask questions and learn more. I no matter where the person has been from, I think a big difference between here in Maine and in other parts of the world is that we like to really engage maybe much quicker. So like learn of each other. Oh, how's your husband doing? How are your kids? It is a much more personal relationship. But I think getting to know who your employees are is a very important piece. Instead of just giving you, there's these things called culturegrams that you can find them online that I used to use when I was in the Multicultural Affairs Office at the state, that are 2 pages that you can read upon a country and social norms and things like that. So you better understand and you're very equipped to have that conversation. But I think being authentic is the number one recipe.
That's really helpful. I appreciate that. And I hope others that are watching are hearing that and can take it to heart. I do want to encourage people, if you have questions for Julia about the presentation, or even if it's something related to this topic, hopefully she can try to tackle those for us. But let's see if we have any other questions that come through. Just give us a second here. And I do want to see that video if you have before we depart today. But
Yeah.
let's see if any other questions are popping through right now. I think we might have one coming. It looks like, what would you suggest as our first step to leave this presentation today and utilize the information that you've shared with us?
I think my number one step would be to hold belonging tables in your organization and ask the challenging questions as to how folks belong and don't belong, and make sure that everyone participates in those discussions. I can tell you that from an immigrant hat perspective, I've participated in events where I was asked to tell my story, and I was on stage, and the rest of my colleagues were on the ground listening to me, and that felt terribly uncomfortable. I would have preferred to be part of a table talking about all of our stories rather than all the rest of the group learning about my very personal journey, but nobody else sharing what. So to me, belonging tables is the first step to then create some kind of a rubric that allows you to measure belonging within your organization, and then set actionable steps and shortfalls that currently exist, and also big wins that you need to continue to expand and promote within your organization.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, as a presenter here today, you're able to give, your experience, and you give a lot of data. But when you're in that audience, I can see why that might feel uncomfortable. If you're sort of up there on an island and sort of alone, it must be more comforting to be able to have, like you said, that table full of people where it's more of a discussion versus being isolated. I like that bit of wisdom. Looks like we have one other question that came through. In the workplace, should some of these discussions about belonging, should they be guided by some sort of department head or HR, or is it better to let these be more organic, employee-driven discussions?
My particular preference is that you get as close to the organic element as possible. We chose, when I was doing these, to not have a department head involved or HR involved. It was myself and another senior colleague holding these discussions and tables throughout the organization, and it opened up. People were crying, people were smiling, people were, and I think it really created that trusting space. But we also had to lead with that vulnerability and share how we belong or how we didn't belong, and also I think it was very important to this was actionable, that we were asking for this information because we were going to do something about it, and I think that level of trust and loyalty made a huge difference. So if that helps, that's how I would go about it, but I know that others go about it in different ways.
That is helpful. And again, if people have questions, we'll talk a little bit before we wrap up that, if you do have questions that maybe you don't have a chance to ask today, let's let those questions come through to the chamber, and we'll provide some information on how to reach Julia as well, because she's a wealth of information, and this is a topic that I think everyone is engaged in and should be more engaged in. So Julia, we have a video that we could play. Do you want to see if we can tee that up now?
Let's see if I can. This is always a different platform, so testing my COVID skills.
I know we all got so good at Zoom, and now we have StreamYard, which is a great platform, but it does have some different requirements.
I can't. It's like it's taking forever. There. Can you see this?
Not yet. Oh, Yep, it's coming up. I see the YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we can maximize that. Perfect. Great.
Can you hear it?
Yes.
It's easy to put people in boxes. There's us, and there's them. The high earners, and those just getting by. Those we trust, and those we try to avoid. There's the new Danes, and those who've always been here. The people from the countryside, and those who've never seen a cow. The religious, and the self-confident. There are those we share something with, and those we don't share anything with.
Velkommen. Jeg kommer til at stille jer nogle spørgsmål i dag. Nogle af dem kan godt være lidt personlige, men jeg håber, I vil svare ærligt på dem. Hvem herinde i rummet var klassens klovn? Hvem er bonusforældre?
And then suddenly, there's us. We who believe in life after death. We who've seen UFOs. And all of us who love to dance. We who've been bullied. And we who've bullied others. And then there's us, the lucky ones who've had sex this past week. We who are broken-hearted. We who are madly in love. We who feel lonely. We who are bisexual. And we who acknowledge the courage of others. We who have found the meaning of life. And we who have saved lives. And then there's all of us who just love Denmark. So maybe there's more that brings us together than we think. TV2 Denmark. All that we share.
That was great, Julia. I've seen that one before, and I'd forgotten how powerful that is. It's interesting when you put it in context like that. Just the simplest things: who likes to dance, who's been bullied, things like that. It's all part of our human experience.
Yes.
Well, listen, thank you again, Julia. This was a great topic. I know we can probably talk for many, many more hours on this. I wish we had more time, but thank you for this great presentation. And of course, thanks to the Chamber staff for helping to produce another successful event. And thanks to each of you for attending today and throughout this year. If you are interested in learning more about the topic, be sure to check your email for a follow-up message with some links to the presentation, the video, and contact information for Julia. And just another shout out for our sponsors, Eaton Peabody, for their support of the Growth Basics for Business series throughout the entire year. We look forward to seeing you again on December 19th when we plan to hear a presentation from Dan Reed of SCORE on the topic of how artificial intelligence can improve your business. The Eaton Peabody Growth Basics for Business series is typically held on the third Tuesday of each month, September through June. Now, with that said, have a wonderful rest of your day. Get outside and try to stay warm.